Renewed tensions in the eastern Mediterranean. Turkey is under fire for resuming exploration for oil and gas. And Israel and Lebanon are arguing over maritime rights. So can these disputes be contained? And does diplomacy still have a chance? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abougeda. Turkey's renewed seismic survey in the eastern Mediterranean is reigniting tensions with Greece. Both NATO members claim the right to drill these same areas believed to be rich in natural gas. Athens considers the redeployment of a Turkish vessel in disputed waters a major escalation and says it'll push for EU sanctions against Turkey. Ankara insists the operations are within its continental shelf and it's responding to provocations by Athens. It had pulled the vessel out of the waters last month, saying it would encourage diplomacy. But President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Greece and Cyprus have failed to fulfill their promises. And now the Turkish leader has threatened to take action.
We will continue to give the response they deserve in the field to Greece and the Greek Cypriot administration, who have not kept their promises during talks within the EU and NATO platforms.
Well, both countries had agreed to hold preliminary discussions to ease the dispute earlier this month. But the Greek Prime Minister, MITSOTAKIS, says Athens won't engage with Ankara as long as the vessel remains in the region.
I think we offered Turkey a very clear choice at the recent European Council. Renewed partnership or face consequences should this aggressive behavior continue. And unfortunately, it seems for the moment that Turkey has chosen the second path.
Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Istanbul is Matthew Bryza, who's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a former U.S. diplomat who worked on the Greece, Cyprus and Turkey issues at the U.S. State Department. Over in London is James Ker-Lindsay, who's a visiting professor at the London School of Economics, researching Greece-Turkey relations and the Cyprus conflict. And over in Nicosia in Cyprus, Andreas Theophanos, who's the president of the Cyprus Center for European and International Affairs and a former economic advisor to the president of Cyprus. Welcome to Inside Story. Thanks very much for your time. Matthew Bryza, Turkey has now redeployed that vessel to disputed waters. What message is it sending out by doing so?
I think what President Erdogan is doing is saying, we were hoping that there were going to be some de-escalatory talks under the auspices of NATO, European Union. The way the government here has played it is that they were upset when last week the Greek government issued a NAVTEX, so a notification that they were going to conduct naval exercises in the Aegean Sea and on Turkey's National Independence Day. It felt like a raw nerve was touched because that Independence Day is actually commemorating the end of a war fought between Turkey on one side and then Greece and the United Kingdom and others on the other side.
Right, but let me ask you this. Erdogan said this, and I quote, "We will continue to give the response they deserve on the field to Greece and the Greek Cypriot administration who have not kept their promises during talks within the EU and NATO platforms." Well, what are these responses?
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what he has in mind because I don't know what transpired in those discussions. But my understanding is that the talks were going okay, and the idea was let's de-escalate tension. And let's have a discussion about this legal dispute from the Turkish perspective, which is murky. It's not a concrete black and white situation as to who's right, who's wrong. So in terms of responses, I think what he means, he's being potentially dangerously ambiguous, suggesting there could be military force involved. But what I think he means is that the seismic survey ship, Oruc Reis, is going to continue its exploration. The drill ships are going to continue their exploration, and they're going to be probably accompanied by Turkish Navy vessels.
James, again, let's just focus in on what the president of Turkey had to say. When he says that Greece and the Greek Cypriot administration have not kept their promises, he didn't spell out what those promises exactly were. From your understanding, James, what does he mean by this?
Well, you know, it's a very confusing situation all round, because I think the point that was just made was very good, that it was to say Turkey has a particular viewpoint on the nature of these disputes. It also has a very particular viewpoint on how these disputes should be addressed, namely in bilateral negotiations. But the big problem that we're seeing is that it's using what is seen by many outsiders to be an overly aggressive tactic to try and bring Greece, certainly, to the negotiating table. And so it's very unclear to know exactly what Erdogan means on any given day on a lot of issues. So what he might have in mind is probably not what a lot of Turkey's partners in NATO and certainly in the European Union have in mind for how we should be dealing with these disputes at the moment.
Yeah, we'll certainly get into the discussion of NATO and the EU. But let me ask you, James, then, what Greece has in mind. Because Matthew Bryza just correctly pointed out that Athens did hold military drills in the Aegean Sea on one of Turkey's main national holidays. So what's behind that message? And what is the message that Athens is sending out?
Well, look, I mean, I think the important thing to bear in mind is that, you know, there is quite a long history of Greece and Turkey needling each other on various issues and things. But what we're seeing here is a resurgence of a dispute between Greece and Turkey that we had felt had actually dissipated to a certain extent over the past 20 years. Over the past 5 years, it's been getting steadily worse, I think. And what we're seeing now is that crisis. But, you know, we were looking 20 years ago at a major process of rapprochement where it looked like there might be a window of opportunity for the two countries to start to address these bigger issues. And that's now disappeared. And one thing that really stands out for anyone who works on these sorts of issues is that it's so much easier to address these sort of maritime disputes if there's an element of goodwill and trust between two countries. Lots of countries have maritime disputes. What we're seeing here is a gradual ratcheting up, or quite a significant ratcheting up, of the tensions between the two countries, which is just creating, if you like, a vicious circle, which makes it more and more difficult for them to sit down and not even work out how they're going to, you know, what they're going to do to solve the problem, but how they're even going to talk about solving the problem.
Andreas, let me bring you in from Nicosia, and we're also going to get into the issue of Cyprus in a moment. But first of all, just weigh in on the situation between Greece and Turkey. Is there any goodwill at this point to resolve issues?
Goodwill from whom? I think over time, Athens has been exhibiting goodwill, and it was supporting Turkey in its European ambitions, expecting that there would be reciprocal steps. That did not happen. Talking from Nicosia in relation to Cyprus, well, we must not forget that for 46 years, Turkey is occupying 38% of the territory of Cyprus. It has been provoking, invading the exclusive economic zone of Cyprus. Recently, in Brussels, there were no sanctions against Turkey. Instead, the European Union called for talks and wanted to see a process through which problems in the Eastern Mediterranean would be resolved. Turkey, a few days after that, it took a step in relation to the fenced city of Varosha, and it is moving towards opening that, which is contrary to the United Nations Security Council resolutions. All in all, from our perspective, we see that Turkey's revisionist power. Erdogan himself does not conceal this fact. He has repeatedly declared that he would like to see the Treaty of Lausanne revised. In relation to Cyprus, he does not, he has stated many times that he does not recognize the Republic of Cyprus and its right to exist. Yet, when it comes to the Eastern Mediterranean, it invokes part of the 1960 agreements to demand rights for Turkey and the Turkish Cypriots, while at the same time forgetting obligations. I think at this point in time, there is what I would say a lot of suspicion, mistrust, and the climate is not positive. I understand, on the other hand, that major powers in the European Union, as well as the United States, would like to see some form of a dialogue in order to ease tensions, but it takes two to tango.
Okay, let's talk about the EU for a moment, Andreas. I'll stick with you for a second because the EU, as you pointed out, did threaten Turkey with sanctions if it, according to the EU, failed to stop what the bloc was describing as illegal drilling and energy exploration activities in this particular area in the Eastern Mediterranean. But now the voices are growing again for sanctions. But do you actually think the EU will be going down that route? And does the EU all speak in one voice when it comes to Turkey?
Certainly not. I mean, like the European Union has not yet developed into a geopolitical power that it will have a strong and unanimous say in the Eastern Mediterranean or elsewhere. But I think in the case of Cyprus, we can think outside the box. Let me put on the table some suggestions. Turkey and the Turkish Cypriots would like to see cooperation between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots on the energy issues, even before the solution of the Cyprus problem. I think it would be good if that is going to take place. Turkey should agree to delineate the exclusive economic zone between Cyprus and Turkey, and at the same time, move on with the implementation of the relevant Security Council resolutions on Varosha, that is, allow the Greek Cypriot legal residents of Varosha to return under the auspices of the UN. I think under such a scenario where we have some small but major steps towards cooperation, at least that would, it may create a positive climate, reduce tensions, and at least try to build on some confidence.
Okay, let me stop you right there for a second. James, would you like to jump in?
Yes, we can be very honest and say, look, it sounds nice to have confidence-building measures, but I've been working on Cyprus for 30 years, and I can tell you that all confidence-building measures do is actually reduce trust. We need to be focusing on an overall settlement. So the idea that you're going to get the Greek and Turkish Cypriots to sit down and reach a comprehensive deal on energy and not do a big deal, I just can't see it happening. And all we're going to do is get drawn into this debate for another couple of years where the Cyprus problem as a whole is just going to sit and languish, and they're going to talk and talk and talk around the issues. It won't achieve any successful outcome.
Right. So what are you proposing?
I think that, you know, we really need to be focusing on what we should always be focusing on, which is a comprehensive settlement of the Cyprus problem. That once you get the parties together to sort this issue, all these issues get resolved at a stroke. You solve the Cyprus problem, you will be talking about the effective recognition of the entire island of Cyprus, its territorial waters. You know, there may be some issues that will need to be sorted out with Ankara, but it becomes much more manageable than trying these piecemeal sort of confidence-building measures. The history of the Cyprus problem has shown that confidence-building measures actually do more harm than good. Very little ever comes out of it, and it just undermines trust. So I really do think that what we need to be doing is focusing on how we're going to get the sides back to the negotiating table. There's major elections coming up in northern Cyprus this weekend, which might provide a chance for a resumed UN negotiation process. And this is effectively, I think, where we need to be focusing.
Matthew, it very much sounds like...
If I may...
Yeah, go ahead, Andreas. And Matthew, I'll come over to you in just one second. Go ahead, Andreas.
I have made these suggestions because what James is suggesting, that took place for 46 years and it didn't work out. That did not work out. The policy pursued so far. And in relation to the Cyprus question, we must see that the UN process for intercommunal negotiations, bicommunal negotiations, it addresses only one dimension of the problem. Yet the major problem is the fact that Turkey is occupying 38% of the territory of Cyprus. It has more settlers. It has put settlers on the northern part of the island. Turkish Cypriots are less than 50% minority, even in the northern part of Cyprus. So I think even the process that we have worked so far, it didn't work. Turkey used this time, all this year, to consolidate a de facto situation. I was born with the Republic of Cyprus in 1960. I'm aware that James has been doing a lot of work in Cyprus, but I'm living here and I have experienced step by step what has taken place all these years. And our perception is different. Yes, it would be great to see a comprehensive settlement, and I think over time Greek Cypriots have made concessions that nobody would have been thinking of. For example,
okay, we're just right. I understand.
Just to say something.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's 2-1, so please allow me. I mean, in relation to what we have considered in Cyprus, if Turkey were to offer what Greek Cypriots have offered to the Turkish Cypriots, I think there would be no Kurdish problem in Turkey as well.
Okay, I understand what you're saying about the issue of Cyprus. Matthew, let me bring you in, because obviously the discussion is heading into this, the differences when it comes to the island of Cyprus. So there are many issues at play here, but let's just get back to the issue of gas and energy resources and mediation efforts, because we've seen kind of an absence by the U.S. when it comes to this. Germany has sought to mediate between Greece and Turkey. France has weighed in as well, but it's weighed in more explicitly on the side of the Greeks. To what extent can diplomacy be achieved at this point, and by whom?
Yeah, I think at this point we are at an impasse. I mean, going back to what Mr. Theophanis was saying, and James as well, there are all these years, 46 years of trying to reach a comprehensive solution. And I think that 3 years ago, when the last round of UN-mediated talks collapsed, I think Turkey kind of gave up. Because as Mr. Theophanis says, he sees the Greek Cypriots as having made significant concessions. The Turkish side thinks it did too, including to withdraw all of its troops from the island. So the UN process, I think, is kind of dead. The U.S. is absent. And I think what we've seen throughout the course of the summer is that the biggest outside player right now is France. And it's been President Macron, who has a lot of enmity with or toward President Erdogan. I mean, France and Turkey have squared off on different sides in Syria and in Libya, now in Azerbaijan. And so I think the mediator I would ultimately have to be the European Union as a whole, unless the UN could get back involved. But right now, the prospects of mediation, I think, are really remote.
Well, okay, speaking of the U.S. and where it hasn't been absent, there's another dispute on maritime rights in the Eastern Mediterranean, and that's between Lebanon and Israel. So they've started their first round of indirect talks on gas exploration rights. At stake there are more than 860 square kilometers of waters that both claim are in their exclusive economic zone. The first session on Wednesday was hosted by the United Nations. It was mediated by the U.S., and it marks a first step in efforts to demarcate maritime borders between those two countries. James, so the U.S. clearly involved in these maritime discussions between Lebanon and Israel. So another source of tension in the region. Do you expect a breakthrough there?
Well, I mean, we're dealing with a very, very different environment than a lot of us who have spent many decades working on the Eastern Mediterranean are actually even frankly used to and trying to get our heads around, because the whole patterns of relationship in the region have fundamentally altered. Now, I can remember in the 1990s that if you looked at the geopolitical environment in the Eastern Mediterranean, the two best friends were Turkey and Israel. That there was absolutely no love lost whatsoever between the Republic of Cyprus and Israel, or even between Greece and Israel. And then now you look at this situation where everything's been turned on its head. And now we see Cyprus is really buddying up. There's a loving effectively going on between Cyprus and Israel and Greece and Israel. Turkey-Israeli relationship is, well, that's past history. And then now you're starting to see things like talks between Israel and Lebanon, which I think many people would have felt would have been just completely beyond the pale even a few years ago.
Right, indirect talks, we must point out, though. These are indirect talks.
How things are changing.
Okay, James, I'll stick with you for one more question then. Do you agree with Matthew then at this point it has to be talks under the UN auspices or the EU members when it comes to Greece and Turkey? And can the EU be objective here with both Greece and Cyprus being members?
Well, I think, this is where we get into the sort of problematic picture, because although we tend to lump Greece and Turkey's issues along with Cyprus, they are actually rather different from each other. The question of Cyprus I think Andreas said it was about invasion and occupation. To an extent, yes, it is. But, that ignores the fact that there's a fundamental issue between Greek and Turkish Cypriots. And I think, it's unfortunate to just count out the Turkish Cypriots in that way. But when you talk about the issues between Greece and Turkey, these are much more legally centred. Essentially, Greece and Turkey sorted out their boundaries 100 years ago under the Treaty of Lausanne. What we've seen is the development of international law, and the fact that Greece and Turkey need to be able to find a way to talk about their boundaries now that the extent of territory that they can claim is very different under international law. And this is the problem. And I think there is room for Greece and Turkey to sort out their problem. Again, a lot of it's to do with goodwill. If there's goodwill and there's trust and that they can sit down and they can really talk about it. And the really big issue is a tiny island of Castellorizo, which I probably won't go into a lot of detail here, but it means that effectively Greece suddenly gets another big chunk of the Eastern Mediterranean, which Turkey feels is fundamentally unfair. So it's how they sort it out. Can they negotiate and then take it to the International Court of Justice? Or do they try and get some sort of legal arbitration from day one, or just stick to negotiations? So at the moment, they aren't even finding ways to talk about how to talk about their problems.
Andreas, does NATO step in here? Can NATO play that mediating role? I mean, there have been about 60 rounds of talks in the space of 14 years between Greece and Turkey, and they've brought little progress. And now we're at a position where talks are just completely stalled.
Before I get to answer your question, let me say that I think Mr. Bryza should, update and correct its facts. I think if Turkey were to agree to withdraw its troops from Cyprus and also agree that there should be a different guarantee status, for example, Security Council to guarantee the Republic of Cyprus, that it would be a big step towards resolving the Cyprus question. I think that this is perhaps the most thorny issue, that Turkey is not giving up its right to be, its so-called right, with inverted or without inverted commas, to be in Cyprus. That's point number one.
Just stand by for a second. Okay. Matthew, would you like to respond?
Yeah, those are the 2 points. Turkey giving up its right of guarantee and Turkey agreeing to withdraw all of its troops over time over the island. When I was involved with the so-called Annan plan back in the early 2000s, those were the final sticking points. And I'm not going to divulge sources, but I can say I know from high up in the UN apparatus, people who were in the talks, that Turkey did, in fact, put those 2 things on the table, and Cyprus rejected it. So I think at that point, Turkey said,
okay,
why go on?
Mr. Bryza, Andreas, I know for a fact that Annan plan, it had to do with the future of my country. But the fact that 76% Greek Cypriot voted no, it's indicative of a very uneven and just plan. You know very well.
Mr. Andreas, just for the sake of time, just tell me how you see this going forward in terms of mediation.
My philosophy is that given the fact that for 46 years, we tried a certain process and it didn't work out, my philosophy is that we should try an evolutionary process which should go side by side with trying to address trying to reach a comprehensive solution of the problem. It's not or the other. That's why I'm suggesting, I'm bringing this to the table. I'm an academic, and I suggested, I made some suggestions, which I think it could be a good starting point to move on, to agree to something, reduce tensions, and that would reinforce goodwill towards resolving the Cyprus question. I think in relation to NATO, Turkey is part of NATO, Cyprus is not part of NATO.
Right.
That may create a problem. I think, so we have the European Union, we have the Security Council of the United Nations. I think this should be addressed in this way. And for me, it's not either or. It's very clear in the case of Cyprus what is being taking place. Cypriots who have experienced all these years, we know that Turkey, it does not recognize the right of the Republic of Cyprus to exist. We have on record Turkish officials saying that even if one single Turkish Cypriot did not live on the island of Cyprus, Turkey would still want to have a strong say on developments on the island.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
We'll have to leave it there on that note. Thank you very much for joining us, Matthew Bryza, James Ker-Lindsay, and Andreas Theophanos. Thank you very much for your time with us. Thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. AJ for further discussion. You can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From myself and the whole team here in Doha, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye for now.